anybody here watching American Psycho for the first time? Oh wow, okay, so a few more of you than I expected. I hope you enjoy. I did anticipate that this would be a repeat viewing for most of us. Obviously, it's in comparison to a lot of the films that we're watching this weekend. American Psycho is quite mainstream, a very commercially successful horror film that's only continued to grow in terms of cult appeal since it was released in the year 2000. I think that is largely helped by its kind of endless quotability, as well as its kind of repetition in meme culture. Lots of memes now about videotapes, business cards, and Huey Lewis in the news. But I really love this film. And I also, I really love the book that it's adapted from, by Bret Easton Ellis, published in 1991. I'm going to assume that a few of you have read it and more of you will have not. But the book is a very different beast to the film. It's a very, very violent, satirical takedown of toxic masculinity and yuppie consumerism in 1980s Manhattan. So they are very different, but adaptations of the book were in the works from quite soon after Bret Easton Ellis's novel was published in 1991. And there were various people attached to the potential film throughout the early part of the 1990s. Stuart Gordon was involved at some point, and Bret Easton Ellis himself even wrote a script for David Cronenberg, which featured a finale, which was a musical number on top of the World Trade Center. So that would have been a very different kind of film, and I would have been up for watching it, but that's not what we're here to watch today. So yeah, very, very, very different. But the book has this kind of stream of consciousness, first-person narration, and lots of very lurid, gruesome detail, particularly in very lengthy chapters describing the torture and the murder of women in almost the same kind of detached, rambling, detailed style that Patrick Bateman uses to talk about the latest Whitney Houston record or a Valentino suit. So this same kind of dispassionate response to the slaughter of women in his life. So Patrick Bateman's methods in the book is as cruelly sexually violent and misogynistic as it is outrageously and creatively detailed in terms of Ellis's writing. So understandably then, the book was for a very long time considered unfilmable, and it took a good decade for this to come to fruition. But forget Stuart Gordon, forget David Cronenberg, enter Mary Harron. Producer Edward Pressman brought Mary Harron and her co-writer Guinevere Turner on board after being impressed by Harron's feature debut film, which was I Shot Andy Warhol. And Harron and Guinevere Turner set about adapting Easton Ellis's novel and reworking it, facing at the time during production, right up until the time of its release, facing quite a lot of backlash and a lot of protests from feminist groups, which kind of echoed the response to the release of Ellis's novel. But the involvement of female filmmakers was actually kind of in the end promoted as a corrective measure. Harron noted that as women, they kind of removed some element of offence, and Turner suggested that it was a strategic move to get a woman at the helm of the film, and that the controversy, although it was painful, could only be good for promotion of the film. So this idea that women being involved in the adaptation of this kind of ultra-violent, supposedly misogynistic book was presented as a kind of promotional opportunity, really. And ultimately, what it means is that Harron's film is a really slick, darkly comic adaptation, which kind of quells a lot of the shocking violence of Ellis's novel. It excludes or it reframes lots of its more provocative sequences to ensure that it was more generally well received by a much broader audience on wider release. And it was Mary Harron who insisted on casting Christian Bale, who was an actor at that point with much less star appeal than some of the other names that the producer had wanted. Leonardo DiCaprio was involved for a very long time. Again, would have been a very different film. Tom Cruise was kind of attached for a little while. And we can laugh, but Tom Cruise actually provided some inspiration for Bale's performance of Bateman. Christian Bale described Tom Cruise as having a particular kind of energy, a very intense friendliness with nothing behind the eyes. Which is kind of harsh, but we've all seen a Tom Cruise film, right? So see if you can kind of spot that in his performance while you're watching today. Mary Harron's insistence on Christian Bale really makes perfect sense because his performance is by turns kind of physically manic and emotionally blank, and it emphasises both the black comedy and the horror of the character of Patrick Bateman, but it also embodies this kind of performative facade that Bateman has, and presents him as this character who, you know, Bateman describes himself early on in the film as the idea of a Patrick Bateman, some kind of abstraction, an entity, something illusory. And Bale imagined Bateman as being pathetic, as certainly not a cool character, not a cool guy. And Guinevere Turner, similarly, has described how men, misunderstanding both the character of Patrick Bateman and the point of her adaptation, have approached her and kind of said, "I am Patrick Bateman." And her response to those guys became invariably, "Are you saying that you're a dork or a serial killer?" So Christian Bale's excessive turn as iconic pop culture psycho Bateman, and I keep trying to say Batman for obvious reasons, Bale, Bateman, Batman, you just have to bear with us. So yeah, it's Bale's performance that takes kind of centre stage here and really takes over the film. But I think that does a disservice to a lot of the other characters, the supporting cast within Harron's film, particularly the women. So there's a really strong supporting cast in Reese Witherspoon, Samantha Mathis, Chloe Sevigny, and Cara Seymour, among others. And the adaptation mostly moves away from Bateman's kind of lengthy interior monologues that occupy the book, and allows us instead to see a lot of the reactions to both his ridiculous exploits and his violent nature. The book can't show us the frustration of his fiancée Evelyn, or the kind of resigned melancholy of his girlfriend Courtney, but Harron captures all of this and much more besides. Albeit very briefly, the film offers the perspectives of the women in Bateman's world. So you get these kind of knowing looks and subtle eye rolls between the sex workers that he hires for a threesome. You get the camera staying with Christie as she tries to escape him towards the end of the film. And you get his secretary, Jean, a moment of reflection on her own as she finds his diary and kind of evidence of his crimes, or at least what he imagines are his crimes. It's never entirely sure. And this changes, this kind of subtle inclusion of female perspectives, I think is one of the most significant features of American Psycho's adaptation. Harron and Turner allow us to observe rather than experience being Patrick Bateman so that we can connect with his victims. We can look from outside and we can both critique and convict Bateman. And the story's women in this film are offered some agency and some empathy in a fictional world in which they have none. I am not suggesting, importantly, I'm not suggesting that Harron and Turner kind of redeemed Bret Easton Ellis's novel in some way, or even that it needed to be redeemed. And they have defended Ellis numerous times against misconceptions that the book is inherently misogynistic in and of itself. And of course, as we all know, being fans of what we are, showing or writing about despicable and violent acts is not the same thing as endorsing them. But the film does make palatable some content that would have been unpalatable for an awful lot of people. And the novel and the film then offer very similar critiques of the kind of misogynistic fallout of masculinity in crisis in 1980s corporate America, but they take very different approaches in doing so, and especially in their interest in the story's women, and I think that that deserves a little bit more consideration. So I hope you can see that in this screening and maybe reflect on it a little bit, and more than anything else, I hope that you enjoy American Psycho. Thank you.